Call the member for Newcastle.
Thank you, Mr Temporary Speaker. It was with much fanfare that the Parliamentary Secretary for the Hunter stood alongside the Premier and her Deputy as they announced the 20-year economic vision for regional New South Wales. The vision, to use its grandiose shorter name, was trumpeted by the Parliamentary Secretary as, quote, a 20-year vision for a thriving Hunter region. The Hunter Functional Economic Region was defined as the vision as encompassing Cessnock, Maitland, Muswellbrook, Port Stephens, Singleton and Upper Hunter Shire local government areas. Lake Macquarie LGA has been carved off and linked with the Central Coast. The Newcastle local government area, the economic and population centre of the Hunter, is conspicuously missing from the list. The latest snub has only confirmed, yes, my colleague, only confirmed what many in Newcastle already knew. This government's approach to addressing regional issues has been scattershot at best, and their attitude toward major population centres outside Sydney could be generously described as contemptuous. In an op-ed for the Newcastle Herald, Hunter Business CEO Bob Hawes said of the government's vision, questions remain whether the Hunter is hamstrung when the Newcastle local government area is effectively partitioned from its hinterland. The Chamber believes, he wrote, the latest vision underscores the need for government and business to identify and understand the linking piece between the significance of regional capitals like Newcastle and Wollongong and how these centres best work in their regions to generate the best outcome and not be separated from them. The exclusion of Newcastle from surrounding suburbs is not a one-off oversight, however. And when you've got the Hunter Business Chamber CEO going against the government in terms of their definitions and backing in us, you certainly need to take a very good look, I would suggest, Ms Premier. But take, for example, the Premier's announcement back in April that $100 million would be made available to sporting groups across the LGAs that comprise Greater Sydney. This funding would be made available on top of the $100 million Regional Sports Infrastructure Fund, which was made available to 94 councils outside Sydney, Newcastle and Wollongong. Effectively, Newcastle Council has been excluded from both funding streams, as has Wollongong. This government can make argument that the City of Newcastle is no longer regional, but the facts on the ground make this suggestion laughable. Under these plans, parts of the suburb of Ellamore Vale are eligible for grants while others aren't. Katara has been excluded, but Katara South hasn't. In my electorate, Stockton is eligible, but Fern Bay and Fullerton Cove just up the road are, simply because Stockton is in the Newcastle LGA and the neighbours in Fern Bay and Fullerton Cove are in the Port Stephens LGA. What makes Stockton more regional or less regional than Fern Bay or Fullerton Cove? What makes one end of Jubilee Road in Ellamore Vale more or less deserving than the other end? Businesses tell us the key to them investing in our region is certainty. That's what the Parliamentary Secretary for the Hunter said. But this government's own policy can't make up its own mind about whether Newcastle is regional or metro. At the same time, Newcastle LGA has been included from the Hunter Functional Economic Region and the Regional Sports Infrastructure Fund. However, it is eligible under the Resources for Regions program and the Regional Roadblocks grants. What's more, Newcastle Council can apply for grants under the Commonwealth's Building Better Regions Fund. It is so contradictory, and this government is all over the place on this issue. In early July, a motion I took to the floor of our own Labor State Conference, which passed, called on Conference ALP to adopt a consistent definition of regional and metro for the purposes of grant funding, to create a clear definition of different funding categories for areas outside Greater Sydney. This will give communities a fair chance of accessing and securing government funding and will ensure the certainty the Parliamentary Secretary for the Hunter insists businesses so crave. But in the interim, Newcastle residents, business and community groups need the government to step up and clarify our city's status. Of course, it's not just regional funding that we're missing out on. The confusion means major local projects are missing out on metro funding too. Projects that will have a negative impact on the development of the Port of Newcastle, Newcastle's airport, both key to developing our future. I joined Newcastle Lord Mayor Nuatali Nelms in calling for the Premier to address these concerns. She said these big infrastructure projects remain largely unfunded and stifling economic growth for Newcastle and the broader region. She's right. We can't remain in this limbo. It's up to the government to do something about it. The government's vision may prove to be very short-sighted otherwise.
I thank the member for Newcastle.